This is Augie Macro with Cryptid Creatures. In this episode, the first of a two-part investigation on the subject, we are going to talk about a variety of cryptids, which are very rarely discussed or documented even among the cryptozoological community, but are perhaps one of the most fascinating and strangely plausible creatures in all of cryptozoology. Collectively, they are the atmospheric beasts.
We've got the speed, John. Glenn, 10, 9,
Atmospheric beasts, also known as organic UFOs or EBANIs, which is a Spanish acronym that translates to unidentified aerial biological entities, is a collective title for unidentified aerial phenomena which seem to appear or behave in an organic or biological fashion. If you were to see a UFO which looked biological rather than mechanical and acted more like an animal than a spaceship, you might have seen an atmospheric beast. These sorts of atmospheric animals are said to reside as native species in Earth's atmosphere, akin to the marine life in our oceans, but are instead suspended in the air, having significantly less dense bodies, flight organs, and lighter than air gas bladders to stay afloat. Those who have studied this phenomenon claim that these atmospheric creatures may only make up around 5% of the entire UFO phenomenon, leaving the rest open to the potential for military testing, weather balloons, extraterrestrial spacecraft, interdimensional beings, and so on. The potential for biomechanical or sentient alien spacecraft, as well as cosmobionts, or space-dwelling alien life, which survives in the void and comes down to check on earthbound life on occasion, are also there, backed up by their own collections of reports and are probably topics deserving of their own episodes. However, on this episode, we're discussing the potential for life existing natively in the global ocean of air above our heads. Though this may sound far-fetched at first, the potential for such life is more scientifically plausible than one might think, and sightings of such beings have been reported by thousands of people across the world, from every walk of life for thousands of years, and they haven't shown any signs of decline. Scientific research in recent years has proven the existence of a diverse ecosystem in Earth's atmosphere, at least in the form of microorganisms, generally known as aeroplankton. These organisms spend their entire lives suspended in the air, in clouds, in water droplets, and represent virtually every lineage of invertebrate life on Earth, mostly made up of viruses, bacteria, archaea, fungal spores, and pollen, but also including the spores of mosses and ferns, airborne cyanobacteria and microalgae, arthropods such as insects, spiders, and copepods, nematodes, flatworms, tardigrades, and even relatives of jellyfish, mollusks, and sponges. A rather promising study in this subject was conducted by NASA in 2024. Known as the PACE mission, standing for Plankton, Aerosol, Cloud, and Ocean Ecosystem, used satellite observation of global ocean biology to determine the relationship between aerosols, ocean phytoplankton, and weather patterns to learn about how to measure the health of the oceans. And they came to many intriguing determinations regarding aeroplanktons and their abundance. There has even been research into the potential for airborne microalgae to be used as a sustainable source of biofuel. Such a diverse array of life, and the fact that life abhors an ecological void, begs the question: if the foundations of this ecosystem, the aeroplankton, are present, abundant, and as diverse as they are, why would the environment end there? Why would there not be larger macroorganisms to fill those niches? the grazers, the filter feeders, the scavengers, the decomposers, the generalists, the predators. If there are deer and dogs and bears, elephants, birds, lizards, and humans on land, and fish, sharks, seals, octopuses, crabs, and whales in the ocean, why wouldn't that be true in the skies too? Atmospheric beasts are said to reside the world over, in every sky on every continent, from the equator to the poles. For our purposes, it is easier to look at it not as a map, but as a column, to view the layers of the atmosphere, similar to how one would look at the water column of the oceans to see how deep or shallow marine species exist. We, as well as the rest of terrestrial life, cloud formations, and storm systems, reside in the troposphere, which ends around 7 miles up. The next layer, the home of most commercial flights and the ozone layer, is the stratosphere, which ends about 31 miles up. Next is the mesosphere, home of shooting stars, which reaches up 50 miles. After that is the thermosphere, where the auroras form, most man-made satellites such as the International Space Station orbit, and the edge of space begins, ending about 440 miles up. Finally is the exosphere, which ends about 6,200 miles up, where the air particles become too spread out to measure and outer space officially begins. It is believed that most of these atmospheric beasts primarily reside in the stratosphere and mesosphere, above the ozone layer, where temperatures are mild and vast quantities of water vapor hang suspended in the air, creating the basis of this atmospheric ecosystem. Most sightings of these creatures occur in the troposphere, since most eyewitnesses are regular people on the ground. It is believed that these creatures often descend to the troposphere for food, reproduction, and so on. These creatures have also been sighted higher up in the atmosphere, with astronauts and cosmonauts having reported life forms flying around in their space capsules or space stations, such as the ISS, up in the thermosphere. To learn more detail on the subject and actually talk to the man whose work inspired this episode, we spoke to Justin England, a.k.a. Mr. E of the Cryptids of the Corn podcast, and author of Living UFOs, The Oceans Above Our Heads. What got you into the whole cryptid thing?
Oh, before I did this kind of stuff, I was a fisheries biologist. But way before that, I was always an animal kid. And I loved lake monsters and sea monsters and, river monsters, all that stuff. So when that's kind of what got me into it. And then I worked with endangered species. And the more I worked with endangered species, the more you would not believe the animals that are able to hide. My claim to fame is when I was a biologist, we found a species of fish that was state endangered, state extirpated, called a Iowa darter.
Okay.
It's a little tiny fish. We found it next to a giant warehouse being put in. So, I mean, literally one spot on this whole stream, about 200 yards long, the only spot in this whole river system this fish still existed. Fish, you probably fit 4 of them on your pinky. As far as intelligent animals, I have friends that work with mountain lions, and they have collared mountain lions that they were never able to find again, because you can get 30 feet from these cats, and they just don't want you to see them, so you're not going to see them. But yeah, so that's, I guess, part of the cryptid fascination. I'm a rambler, as you can tell.
Yeah, so am I. To the topic of atmospheric beasts.
Yes.
How did you specifically become interested in this particular topic of cryptids?
So me and Jay were doing an episode. This would have been like 2019, 2020. And I'd always, a long time ago, the Cryptid Out podcast, I talked about gargantuan gliders. And, we're definitely not the first people to ever come up with this topic by any means. I do think we're some of the ones that have peeled it back the most. We were doing stuff with the Betty and Barney Hill, and then there was this weird through line in the 60s and 70s with alien encounters, not quite abductions, but this weird thing where it was always heavily nitrate based. And so Betty and Barney Hill, for anybody who don't know, I highly advise you look at one of the questions they asked, did you have any nitrates? And Barney had a bunch of fertilizer in the trunk, and it wasn't there when they got home. So there's a lot of this experiences with psychedelic effects. So one of the things we thought is maybe atmospheric fungus, intelligent fungus. So if anybody doesn't know, fungus mushrooms, is a great example of fungus, but that's not the only member, are not animals and they are not plants. They are much more closely related to animals than they are plants. They have much more biology in common with us than they do with plants. But they actually move through the soil. For anybody that don't know, mushrooms can count. They can sing. They communicate. We've documented, I think it's 115 different species of mushrooms sharing information. So that's not even interspecies. That's not even interspecies communication. That's multiple species communication. They are one of the few things that have conquered the planet. What I mean is there is a type of fungus in every environment on this planet. From the upper atmosphere to oceanic trenches to the ice sheets in Antarctica actually have these little black dots that we thought was volcanic ash for a long time. Nope, they're fungus that just lives on the Antarctic ice sheets because them and these little Antarctic springtails are the only things that live out there. So that was the why nitrates. Is if you were going to be an atmospheric creature that was moving incredibly fast, buoyancy, essentially, lift, is a hard part of this. So you would have to eat hyper nutritious, dense stuff like weight, cost versus reward. Great white sharks do this where they actually have an organ in their gum line that can determine the fat content of prey items. So that's why they call it exploratory biting for sharks, especially bigger species of sharks. They don't have hands. They can't touch something. So the only thing they got is their big mouth. But great white sharks will actually normally not swallow people even if they accidentally kill a person because we are not fatty enough for them to be worth the digestion.
Yeah.
They're looking for an adult great white shark's looking for seals, dolphins, tuna, these high protein, high fat animals to be worth the digestion. So that's where we started thinking with nitrates and the nuclear stuff. So a lot of people don't realize is a lot of species of fungus love eating radiation and radioactive materials. We actually have a buddy that's was one of the scientists for the Minuteman project. It's basically the fire back at nukes. So if they're supposed to be able to respond within a minute. And he had pictures of being inside these little warheads and stuff like that. And they had to paint every year. They had to repaint the insides of them with antifungal paint because the fungus was trying to get in and eat the radioactive cores of these things. So if you look at everything from Rendlesham Forest to even recently, there's been a string of UFOs messing with the nuclear power plants in Michigan. Did some of these UFOs? I think the organic side of it's maybe 5 or 10% of the actual UFO phenomenon. I don't think it's all of it.
Yeah,
but there was one where the hidden. It wasn't the Rendlesham Forest. It was another incident in England with an American base where they had launched or they had activated the missiles and turned them off like 3 times. The UFO did. And the UFO was like pounding at the ground where the warhead was hidden. And they were freaking out because nobody's supposed to know where this warhead is. And these UFOs like pounding at the ground. And my thing is like, it just seems like it wants the warhead. But yeah, strange biology.
Tell me a bit about your book, how someone can get it, get a copy.
So yeah, it's
what inspired it.
So this is only as far as I can find, this is only the second book ever on the subject. Because as we started getting down this rabbit hole, I wanted more information. And it doesn't exist. There's like Cryptnauts did this episode, and these guys did this episode. Like, it's not that it doesn't exist. Nobody has really started compiling data about it. And there was one book from 1971. I have the original copy over there. It's just also called Living UFOs. So this version of the book, I started working on the book, and I worked on it for like a year. It was like 4,000 or 5,000 pages. It was like scientific, nomenclature. It was bad as far as I was like, nobody's ever going to look at this thing because it just looks like, it looks like the Bible. So I worked with the editor of that book, which is one of the zoologists out of Cincinnati Zoo, to make that version more approachable to the subject. I wanted one that was not super, it is sciencey, but not like super lost in the sauce. So anybody could pick up that book and read it and get an intro into what at least our thoughts and theories are for living UFOs. Everything from convergent evolution, a bunch of encounters, the basic shapes, and all that stuff. So that's what inspired that version of the book. Eventually, we will come out with part 2, which is just, I think it's like 8 or 9,000 pages. It's just some big monster.
Okay.
It's just this big ugly thing.
There are many different varieties of atmospheric beasts described in eyewitness accounts, taking on various familiar forms via the process of convergent evolution, where similar forms develop in independent, unrelated lineages to fill similar ecological niches. Perhaps the most common sightings are of what are called manta rays, which are described as being very similar in shape to their marine equivalents, though descriptions vary, with some possessing tentacles and others being as large as a Boeing 747. They are believed to fill a role similar to baleen whales, filter-feeding aeroplanktons as their food source. Notable sightings include one by a mother and daughter in Mason County, West Virginia in 2003, a flap across northern Chile and California in 2013, a few hundred people in Bogota, Colombia in 2011, 2 residents of West Monroe, Louisiana, and dozens of reports in Provo, Utah over the last few decades.
So manta rays are almost always seen around mountain ranges and large bodies of water. We have probably 400 or 500 manta ray sightings that we have in a folder. And I'll say 90% of them fall under those two, one of those 2 parameters, if not both. So we think that they may still be giving birth or laying their eggs in the water, because we've seen some of the stories there where they have an ovipositor hanging out. Everybody has known ovipositor is an organ that insects and some animals, like some vertebrates, use.
Turtles have them,
eggs.
actually.
Yeah, turtles.
Yeah.
Sauropods had them. The big long neck dinosaurs, because they were so large. If you just drop your egg 20 feet, it's probably going to explode. There was one lady in Tennessee, I believe it was, had seen one flying in between houses, and she's like describing this thing as the size of a humpback whale, right? It's this massive thing, and she's like, it had a tentacle hanging out that it slowly was pulling back into its body, and it was just flopping around, and she thought it was male genitalia, and because she did, if you don't know, you don't know. And when we heard this story, we're like, oh, that sounds like an ovipositor. That sounds like it was, laying its eggs somewhere, and it was trying to go back up. I would love to see a manta ray. I think that'd be my favorite one to see. Because we've had people in the show. We've actually met a lot of eyewitnesses. It's probably the most common to see. It just, every person we've ever talked to describes a sense of awe. Nobody's ever scared of them. Nobody, like even the lady that's seen the one, like between houses, the size of a humpback whale, she didn't run in her house. She didn't freak out. She just was like, it was like watching a whale. And the first story we ever had was the guy out in Kansas. Him and his girlfriend watched one fly over the trees, and he just described it as he was crying afterwards, not because he was scared, because he's like, that was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. This giant, beautiful creature. I mean, you're talking about an organism that's easily 100 feet long and flaps so slowly, and it's like I've been lucky enough to see a whale, and a lot of people that have seen whales up close will tell you that it's almost a spiritual experience. Seeing an animal, like you just said, like that big, so much, you're so tiny. But whales, a lot of whale species adore us. True baleen whales adore us, which is weird. You're talking about an 80-foot, 100,000-pound animal, and it likes you. We just talked about one story. It was in Nevada, where a lady had one in the backyard looking at her dog. And it was just looking at her dog, and it had one of its little tentacles come out. And she's like, it felt like it was looking at us like we were looking at it. Like it wasn't dangerous, and it wasn't here to hurt us or anything like that. It was just curious, and we were curious about it, and then it slowly flew off. And described it like, a lot of them will describe the flapping as not like a bird, right? Or, it's not using the flapping as lift. It's more as a steering mechanism. I think that they are. So for anybody doesn't know at home, how most fish species, not all fish species, but most fish species have what's called a swim bladder. It is an interior organ that produces and expels gas for buoyancy. So they literally have a chemical reaction going on constantly. All fish are different. They have swim bladders. They have some that actually actively belch, and they have some that it takes a lot longer to release air. And that's like, you see deep sea fish pull up, and that's why that thing that's poking out of their mouth, that's their swim bladder. because the gas is expanded dramatically. So I think that these guys are using that as lift. So if you look at like a lot of the jellyfish and the manta rays, they actually circle before they go up. And if you look at long-term like condors and vultures, these giant gliders, they do the similar thing.
Well, they're trying to catch the thermals.
Yep, they're riding thermals. So they're trying. It's energy efficiency. Powered flight is reserved for birds that can have a higher metabolism, that don't have to worry about that kind of thing. But when you're a condor and you're planning on flying 1,000 miles, or an albatross, albatrosses will fly 1,000 miles without touching the ocean. And like you said, thermals. They will, most of the time they're not more than 20 feet above the water, but they're riding these ocean thermals, 1,000 miles. But they're not flapping that whole time. Their whole body design is for that. So I think these guys are something similar.
Another type are called sky squid, which are described as being generally similar to marine squids and filling a similar role as small, fast-moving predators. Notable sightings include accounts by pilots over Belarus in 1985 and 1999, and by a commercial airliner flying from Phoenix to Portland, Oregon in 2019. Next are what are called sky worms or sky serpents, which often take on very serpentine forms and are compared to oceanic siphonophores, relatives of jellyfish that are formed by the linking together of smaller polyps to create one superorganism, some species growing over 200 feet long. Some accounts of sky worms describe them as having toothy jaws or fins, and they are believed to function as predators like snakes or eels. Notable accounts include reports by locals of Oklahoma City in 1999, multiple witnesses in New Delhi, India in 2008, 2014, and 2015, and the residents of the town of Crawfordsville, Indiana in 1891. The Crawfordsville monster, likely the most famous skyworm account, describes a creature with a 20-foot-long segmented eel-like body, with feathery fin-like structures growing from its sides, a toothy, multi-jawed mouth, and one large red eye, and being described as flailing about in the air as if in severe pain about 300 feet in the air. This description is very reminiscent of some polychaete worms, such as the bobbit worm, and it's believed that the specific creature was sick or dying.
I don't think they're residents of the troposphere. So if you look at a lot of ours that we see, like Crawfordsville is a perfect example.
Yeah.
Where it's this giant, and the biology of Crawfordsville makes no sense unless you compare it to a cyanophore, which for anybody to know is, they're related to jellyfish. They're not jellyfish though, where it's thousands and thousands of small organisms that are basically holding hands to form one big body and work together. Portuguese man-o-wars are the best example, but there are a lot of them look like these worms, or even bristle worms and stuff like that. Where Crawfordsville was wheezing and looked sick, and one of the pastors said it crashed and died in a field. So it's I think they're either breeding down here, so they're not supposed to be here very long. They're getting knocked down here. So another big thing with these sightings you see is they're almost always 3 days before or after a severe storm event. So like I said, we live in the trope. These big thunderheads will scrape at the stratosphere. So even large animals are subject to weather. For example, I'm sure you've seen it, but for everybody at home, 4 or 5 years ago, there was that picture of the humpback whale in the middle of the Amazon. What they didn't tell you is the week before, there was a tsunami. So yes, a humpback whale just basically got stuck in the tsunami. They acted like a UFO had dropped the thing No, there was a giant wave of water that threw it up in there and it just died. So even some of the Earth's biggest, aquatic animals, they can't, storm's a storm. No, you can't beat it. So I think a lot of these guys are that. And you see like a lot of so there's the Chile, where a bunch of miners had killed one in like 1912, this giant manta ray. They had shot it to death. And they had chopped it up into bits. And they just it just was flying real low. So I think when we're seeing them most of the time, they're either breeding or they are dying.
One variety of atmospheric beast is known as the atmospheric amoeba, and as the name suggests, they are described as being large, globular creatures which act like generalist omnivores, consuming whatever they can engulf in their amorphous bodies, like a white blood cell or a real-life amoeba. Notable accounts attributed to atmospheric amoebas include a rain of bones in Carroll Parish, Louisiana in 1872, believed to be the regurgitated remains of prey it couldn't digest, a sighting of an amorphous cloud in Canada in 2021, and the legendary carnivorous pink fog, which was reported to gather along the Tomoka River near Daytona, Florida, from 1955 to 1966. The fog was said to be linked to an Indian curse and to eat away at whoever goes in it, like some corrosive airborne acid.
One thought is that whatever they run into, they just engulf.
Yeah.
So that's actually the kind of the things. If you read the first Living UFOs book by, I forget his name on the top of my head. It's 1971 is the year it came out. But he was in Vietnam. He was in Vietnam, and he was one of the guys that seen them, where they were these giant blobs in the air. And they could actually, so when infrared first came out, it was red, not green. Anybody's ever wondering why do they call it infrared and it's green, right? It's a slightly different spectrum. And one of the big conspiracies and thoughts, and we've talked to some Vietnam veterans and everything that said that they've seen this, where it was for the first 3 months, it was freaking people out because they were seeing these giant blobs flying in the sky, and attack helicopters were shooting at them and killing them. So it wasn't like they were giant flying demons, but you put on these essentially, for you're in Vietnam, people are trying to kill you, you're trying to kill people. It's a high tense, high stress position you're in. You put on these goggles, and now there's, a 400-foot wide jellyfish pancake monster, and you shoot at it and it explodes. So I think they are, to me, they're more like bears, right? Where I think they could bully for prey. I think they're scavengers. I think they're kind of like that because they're big enough. I think
they're big generalist omnivore things.
Yeah. I think they're dangerous enough though. That'd be the one I don't want to run into. Your sharks are more like the squids are active predators. Yeah. And I think the worms are active predators. Because you look at them, what people think are their heads, I think are like slam jaws is what we call them, where they're hinge jaws. Where they're basically a biological bear trap, where they are always under tension. And if they just slam into something, they're going to slam shut and cut whatever they hit. And for a creature like a jellyfish or a manta ray or whatever, that's plenty of enough damage to stop you from moving, or rips off a big enough chunk of you that you're probably not going to live long. So I think that's kind of the basic ecosystem. Those your squids are probably your medium level predators. Your worms are probably your high level predators, like you said. You have your big filter feeders. You have your just drifting predators. And I think your amoebas are the big scavengers / they're bears. If they come in on a kill, they're probably big enough and dangerous enough to just, whatever the other predators is just not worth its time. It's easier to go kill something else than worry about fighting that thing. And also, those are the ones, the atmospheric amoebas are the ones you see like in the highlands and in Florida, where they're just digesting whole piles of death. The cloud that threw up all the bones in Louisiana was probably one of these guys, where it had eaten a bunch of alligator gar and threw up all of what it couldn't digest, like an owl.
What, like skimming the surface of the water, grabbing fish, and just...
So they can do that. What we think happened there is it was 4 days after a storm, and a bunch of gar got stranded, and they were actually complaining about it in the paper, the smell of the rotting fish. So they're all just hundreds of these gar piled up on the bank.
So it just drops down.
It basically came down. It was like a bunch of free, like a all you can eat buffet. And it filled itself. It rained some blood, and then it spit up a bunch of bones. There's the pink fogs of Florida, and there's the tongue clouds of Ireland. Where in Ireland they warn you, if you feel it coming, you're supposed to lay down and let it pass over. You're not supposed to stand up. And some of the witnesses that felt it said it felt like a wet cat's tongue going over their whole body. And the pink clouds in Florida are like death, where the few hunters, there's a whole woods, and I think it's in like 40 minutes inland from Daytona, this forest that has this Legends of the Pink Cloud, where squirrel hunters say that you don't go near it. If you see it, leave the woods. It doesn't move very fast, but it eats everything, like little animals, plants, and everything. It just eats it almost like a gelatinous cube from D&D.
Yeah.
Where it runs into something and it just start, the amoeba style, or it has a permeable membrane. It's basically a giant flying bag of acid.
Yeah.
Or you can outrun them, like just leave, or like in Ireland, they're just like, well, lay down, don't hit the front of the thing. If you stand in the front of the thing, it's bad. We don't hear from those people again.
Likely the most identifiable of these atmospheric beasts are the reports of atmospheric jellyfish, which appear like gigantic floating jellyfish, some over 500 feet wide, and suspended in the air by massive gas bladders like a living zeppelin. Notable reports include one in Toronto, Ontario in 2012, over Norway in 2010, over Qingxian, China in 1998, over Sao Paulo, Brazil in 2021, over the Netherlands in 2015, one depicted in photos taken by NASA over North America in 2012, and a mass migration reported by hundreds across Scandinavia and the Soviet Union in 1977, now known as the Petrozavodsk incident, and perhaps being the most famous account of these creatures.
So the jellyfish are always almost exclusive to the Northern Hemisphere. The higher parts of the Northern Hemisphere, cold climates, mountain ranges. We're talking about northern United States, or Canada, Alaska, Russia, and Scandinavia are almost exclusively where you'll see the jellyfish. Some parts of China have had jellyfish in the northern parts of China. It's very, very, I could probably count on one hand how many we have where they're very towards the equator. And for large animals, this makes sense. So for extremely large animals, as anybody didn't know, for the jellyfish type, we're talking, some of these the main bodies are, 400 or 500 feet long with maybe another, 600 feet of tentacles hanging off them, which we think they're gas filled, right? So they're basically big blimps. They don't weigh as much as they look. They're not, they're still probably, 10 or 20 tons, but it's stretched over a big swim bladder.
Yep.
But there's most large marine animals do not cross the equator. They just don't mess with it. And it's because it's too hot for their body size and it causes health problems. There's very few animals that do this. Humpback whales are one of the few that'll make the trip of large whales. But there's just until relatively recently, right whales had completely isolated populations. They just in the last 100 years have been crossing, and that was with the whaling industry, that their numbers got low enough that it was worth the risk, essentially, to try to find mates.
Yeah.
Of crossing that death divide. And that's there's also I always get this wrong. It's in the book Brigham's Law, basically stating the further away you are from the equator, the bigger the animals get. If you look at bears and even elephants, you look at Asian and African elephants are pretty big, but you look at extinct pachyderms, they got bigger the further away you went from the equator.
Well, yeah, because the smaller an animal it is, the more overall surface area it has proportional to its body mass, and the more heat it gives off. So the closer to the poles you get, the colder it gets, the more heat you need to hold in, so the bigger the animal is. So you stretch the surface area over a greater mass, so
100%.
The proportions help with that.
So that's I can't remember if it's Brigham's, I can never say it right.
Bergman's Law.
Bergman's, thank you.
Could you tell me a bit about the Petrozavodsk phenomenon?
This was Russia, Sweden, and another country. And it was all in one night.
It was like Russia, Sweden, Norway, Belarus, maybe something like that?
It was that whole big belt. Yeah. And this was almost World War III. Because this was scary. Russia thought it was, the UN basically invading. And then, Sweden was like, oh no, it's Russia. Where it was dozens and dozens and dozens of the more manta ray shaped, and several of these giants where they're spewing what they would say was black powder. And we think that was eggs. We think we were witnessing what happened was over several villages across this, 400 or 500 miles. We think it was a massive spawn event that normally did not get witnessed. and it just happened to be, everybody was focused on the skies because everybody's ready to die. Where there was the jellyfish types spawning, and they said it was lights and crazy, and then there was little manta ray shaped craft zooming around them. So if you look up spawning events in the ocean, like tuna spawning events, there's billions of other animals that are there to eat the eggs, right? And that's kind of what it seemed like it happened. And they were describing these giant, and then like a light switch, I believe it was, they went red. So the giant jellyfish went red and started going back up, and everybody left with them. So as quickly as it started, it stopped. Everybody was blaming everybody else. Gosh, that one was crazy. There was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of UFOs. And it was, I think, maybe half a dozen villages. And it wasn't like it was on Moscow or nothing like that. So that was what was the weird part. If it was an invasion or the UN attacking Russia or vice versa, it'd be capitals, it'd be big cities. These were like villages of 5,000 or 6,000 people. Where they had, power and stuff like that. So one of our thoughts was, this was, I think the 60s. I may be wrong. But right when some of these villages were getting a lot of power, and we think they were getting confused by the lights or being attracted by the lights. If you look in New Hampshire, the Hampton Bay manta rays encounters, they come in with the glowing tides. So when there's the bioluminescent tides, and whether they're eating the tides or they just if they communicate with light, so they're being brought in by these lights. It was crazy because it's well documented. I mean, 4 countries have it documented. It almost started a war. It started, I believe, a UN investigation. It's kind of like the Norway cable that keeps going missing. They keep blaming Russia for. It's 40 miles of cable. It's like, it's ungodly movable. And they're like, we think Russia keeps stealing it. I think it's crabs. Scream into the ether about jellyfish until the city comes and collects me.
The next type is known as the living silver discs, which resemble the traditional flying saucer with the same shape and silver reflective coloration, but possessing features and behaviors which distinguish them from mechanical spacecraft. Believed to act as high-speed predators, which use tentacles or even directed energy to catch and kill prey. They are also described as having psychoactive effects on witnesses, possess a level of radioactivity, and have a fascination with nuclear power plants, toxic waste, and the nitrates and fertilizers for their potential as high-energy food sources. Notable accounts include ones by 2 residents of Atlantic City, New Jersey in 2016, and one by 4 airmen over the deserts of Nevada in 1925. Another atmospheric beast that is less often reported officially, but there are many videos of online, is the living cloud, which are essentially creatures which appear to mimic clouds, taking on the shape, colors, and textures of clouds they hide in, acting like chameleons or octopuses, being experts of aerial camouflage. Most reports occur when a person spots a cloud that appears too opaque or solid to be a cloud, and then it starts to move independent of the rest of the cloud on its own, as if it were alive.
You have a couple options when you're in an open environment. So we use the open ocean because it's the closest environment we have, and that's why we think these evolutionary pressures, which pushes these animals to look similar to oceanic animals. So the living silver disc. Lancet fish. So how they hide in plain sight by being hyper reflective.
Yeah.
So that's why they look. If you look at anybody, Google a lancet fish at home. They literally look like liquid metal. They're very gorgeous, but that's how they hide. That's how they hide from predators in plain sight. Is they look like shining water. The next strategy would be like camouflage. How do you camouflage if there's nothing around? So sargassum fish literally look like a pile of sargassum, which is just seaweed for everybody at home. Just a big clump of seaweed. That's their whole strategy is I'm just going to float and drift and look like a clump of seaweed. So there's a lot of these living UFOs that look like clouds. They look like solid-ish clouds. And we actually do live shows and stuff like that. And we have some videos of this where it's clouds with hard shapes and you can see what looks like the animal inside, which is, it's freaky to watch. Where it looks, it's those are probably more prey or filter feeding animals
Mhm.
because they're taking a much more drifting lifestyle. We had a lady from Cincinnati during a tornado. She described seeing a cloud get knocked out of the sky and hit the street.
Hmm.
And she said it looked like it was scrambling down the sidewalk, went into the trees, and then slowly disappeared. And what we were talking to, I wondered if it changed its camouflage, like octopus, can change
Yeah.
outside textures and colors. And the thing was caught in the tornado just as well. It was panicking. It's like, I gotta hide, and just trying to do this.
So what, you think the living cloud things would be like the sky's equivalent of octopuses in that they can change their color and
I
their
think there's
texture?
some of that I think they look like clouds a lot, because we have a lot of videos where these clouds look like clouds at first, and then you really start looking at them and they look a lot more solid.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it is. And they're not really changing shape, and they're flying kind of funky. I think they are just either an ambush predator or just look like a log, like, essentially like an alligator or a crocodile, and just move really slow or scavenge. If there's something dead and they could smell it, 1,000 dead garfish, they're going to, have a buffet. But there are octopus shaped ones. And they're much more like blanket octopus, where they have these
Yeah.
two giant tendrils. We think these are sexual displays. And there's actually some videos of them in planes where they look like, and then they furl them back in. Nobody didn't know blanket octopus are really sexually dimorphic. Where the males are tiny, they just look like a normal octopus. The females are huge and have these two blanket tentacles. And blanket octopus actually mimic other animals, or they can look like sea turtles and tiger sharks, and they fit their forms. They've actually drowned people because they'll pick human shapes, human outlines. And people will look down and see a human laying down there 30 feet and jump in and try to save a person, and then the human melts and disappears. And it was an octopus that took a human shape. So that's another example of convergent evolution.
Another variety, very commonly photographed and filmed, but much less plausible, are the flying rods, also called air rods, sky rods, or just rods, which are described as being long, thin creatures which can move incredibly fast through the air using dozens of small insect-like wings, or some sort of undulating fin like a stingray's fin, to propel itself. Though some compare these to deep-sea marine arthropods like remipedes, they are most likely nothing at all. The vast majority of flying rod reports are recorded on video or in photos, and are actually just distorted images of insects or birds, where the frame rate of the camera is slower than the movements of the bug or the bird, and creates this stretched image where the body forms a rod, and each snapshot of the wings in motion makes a new set of wings on the rod-like body. Unlike the others, this one is easily debunked, though still fascinating.
One thing we didn't get into the book a ton of was just the skyfish. I'm not talking about rods, because I think a lot of rods can be debunked by the shutter speed of cameras.
Yeah.
And that's why they're really not in there, is because I think 90% of rods are insects and birds. I do think there are some compelling rod videos.
Yeah.
But it's hard when you get lumped into that category, because it's like the famous rod cave is all birds.
Yeah.
It's like, I think the camera had like 30 frames per second, and some of those birds were like 80 frames or 80 beats a second, like hummingbirds. But yeah, they look freaky because they're moving 3 times every time the camera is taking one slice.
Yeah. To view part 2 and the conclusion of The Beasts Above the Clouds, tune in next time for season 3, episode 1. Same bat time, same bat channel. Thanks for watching. And to watch our previous and future episodes, visit the Cryptid Creatures YouTube channel. Like, subscribe, and tell your friends. Cryptid Creatures is brought to you by the Kitty Petters Union, Cobble Sound Recording Company, and my dad's show, Meet the Pressers. This is Cryptid Creatures with Augie Macro, signing off.